Farmers say President Trump's tariffs and the threat of tariffs have caused thousands of acres of tomatoes to go to waste because the cost to pack and pick them is more than what tomatoes are selling for this year.
Overnight, the price of a tomato changed, and with it, the global supply chain began to tremble in a surprise move. The U.S. scrapped a long-standing agreement with Mexico and imposed a steep tariff right in the middle of harvest season. Prices surged, businesses faltered, and American consumers were the first to pay the price. But what's really happening behind those neatly stacked baskets of bright red tomatoes in your local grocery store? One decision, a global domino effect. And the tomato is only the first piece to fall. The U.S. government has abruptly withdrawn from the 2019 Tomato Suspension Agreement with Mexico, a deal that had long served as a cornerstone of tomato trade between the two nations. Almost immediately, the Department of Commerce imposed a 17.09% anti-dumping duty on nearly all fresh tomato imports from Mexico. Prices in supermarkets spiked from around $2.5 per pound to over $3.5, and in some places even $4. Where $10 once bought a week's worth of tomatoes, now consumers must cut their purchases in half or settle for lower quality produce. Small restaurants specializing in fresh ingredients, taco joints, salad bars, pizza shops are being forced to revise menus or raise prices. And when a salad costs an extra $1, customers hesitate. Foot traffic drops, and so do the wages of cooks and servers. Mexico, for its part, has firmly rejected allegations of dumping, stating that its exports fully comply with international trade standards. The Mexican Ministry of Economy is actively negotiating with Washington to either revive the former agreement or establish a new trade mechanism aiming to protect millions of tomato farmers in northern Mexico. In southern U.S. states heavily reliant on Mexican tomatoes, warehouses, distribution centers, and packaging facilities are scaling back operations. Several small businesses that once thrived on importing and wholesaling Mexican produce have shut down within weeks of the new tariff taking effect. As agricultural trade with the U.S. grows more volatile, Canada is quietly positioning itself as a preferred destination for Mexican exporters. No tariffs, no policy shifts after each election cycle. No political finger-pointing. Ottawa is seen as a more stable and trustworthy partner than Washington. And it's not just tomatoes. The shift is expanding to bell peppers, strawberries, avocados, all high-value export crops. Canada is also reviewing regulations on origin labeling and repackaging to accommodate the growing flow of Mexican produce, while still complying with the transparency standards under the USMCA. This could lead to more Mexican shipments being processed or relabeled in Canada and then exported to the U.S. as intra-regional goods. If tomatoes become less accessible to American consumers, many small Mexican farms may not survive the season. Conversely, U.S. companies that once relied on a stable supply chain now must look elsewhere, often farther, costlier, and with lower quality options. The standoff between the U.S. and Mexico is no longer just a bilateral trade dispute. It's the beginning of a global trend. The EU, Japan, South Korea, and Brazil are closely observing Mexico's response and slowly shaping independent supply chains that reduce reliance on the U.S. Mexico hasn't retaliated or issued fiery statements, but has instead chosen a firm, diplomatic path, expanding trade partnerships and protecting national interests. This proactive stance is inspiring other economies once shaken by the unpredictable swings of American trade policy. And it's raising a larger question. Is the U.S. quietly losing its grip as the world's supply chain anchor?
With tariff talks top of mind, South Florida farmers say they're in trouble. Crops are rotting on the vine, and they're blaming the ongoing trade wars and immigration changes.
It all started with a tax order. Just one government decision. And suddenly, the U.S. finds itself short on tomatoes and losing more than just produce. If your pizza seems more expensive lately, you're not imagining it. While Washington tightened the door on Mexico, Ottawa quietly opened theirs, and Canadian farmers are the ones cashing in. But behind the headlines and the multi-billion-dollar numbers are things that hit closer to home. Pricier ketchup, restaurant menus being trimmed, and everyday Americans footing the bill for a political move. What's really going on? Here's the picture. Starting July 14th, 2025, the U.S. Department of Commerce officially pulled out of its tomato trade suspension agreement with Mexico. imposing a 17% tariff on all fresh tomatoes coming in from our southern neighbor. The reason? To prevent underpricing and to support struggling farmers in Florida and Arizona. But there's a catch. Mexico supplies about 70% to 93% of the fresh tomatoes consumed in the U.S. So, this policy shift hit like a shockwave. If you usually buy a box of tomatoes for around $3, expect to see that jump to $3.30 or more within a few weeks. And it doesn't stop there. Pizza sauce, ketchup, salsa, these staples could all see price bumps. That burger or pizza slice you enjoy might soon cost an extra 50 cents to $1. 2. Canada moves in on the opportunity. While the U.S. was closing the gate, Canada was busy rolling out the welcome mat. In July 2025, Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum met with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney to announce a major expansion of their agricultural trade relationship. Mexico's cold chain logistics sector, critical for keeping produce fresh, hit $4 billion in value in 2024 and is expected to reach $6 billion by 2029. That's a solid base for tomato exports to grow fast. In the first half of 2025 alone, Canada pulled in $2.8 billion in tomato revenue, largely from rerouted Mexican supply. And with fewer trade hurdles, Canadian shoppers are getting top-quality Mexican tomatoes for around $2.50 a box, roughly 20 to 25% cheaper than what U.S. shoppers are paying at the same time. Pulling out of the Mexico agreement has led to real supply gaps in the U.S. Tomato prices are expected to rise another 6% to 10% by August 2025. Restaurants and food chains, Wendy's, Taco Bell, even household names like Heinz and DiGiorno are all rethinking their game plans. A 30 cc bottle of Heinz ketchup that used to cost $4.29 is now listed at $4.79 in major chains like Target and Walmart. Smaller restaurants are either raising prices or cutting back on tomatoes in their recipes. That means American diners are now directly feeling the impact of a trade policy that may have sounded distant, but now hits right on the dinner plate.
As we just heard, the U.S. president railed against Canadian dairy and lumber industries, claiming the U.S. is being, quote, ripped off.
Once a symbol of American agriculture, the dairy industry now falters right at home. Rather than being shipped off to Europe, Asia, or premium supermarkets, American milk is being dumped near unused farms. Meanwhile, Canada speaks softly but acts decisively and is quietly capturing global market share. Since mid-2025, Canada slapped import duties as high as 300% on U.S. milk that exceeds a small quota under its supply management system designed to protect domestic producers. As a result, over 90% of American milk exported to Canada has been halted. Trucks of U.S. milk have turned back, leaving millions of liters stuck in cold storage in states like Wisconsin, Vermont, and Idaho. Despite falling prices down over 30% in July, demand vanished as consumers grew wary or dismissed it as returned surplus. If you've seen 1-gallon cartons of whole milk drop from $4.20 to $2.90 at stores like Walmart or Kroger, that's not good news. It's a sign that the market is in crisis. With exports to Canada blocked, U.S. dairy entered a downward spiral. Production continued, but buyers disappeared. According to USDA, nearly 1,700 smaller dairy farms risked closure in Q2 2025. America once held 18% of the global dairy market, but by mid-2025, that plunged to under 9%, a two-decade low. This crisis goes beyond farmers. Rural communities that rely on dairy are feeling the pinch. Schools cutting lunches, local stores left empty, banks tightening credit, and jobs vanishing. If you once lived in a small town anchored by a dairy plant, now you may see that plant shuttered, hiring signs removed, and an entire community in limbo. It's not just Canada. Key global partners are turning away U.S. dairy. The European Union added U.S. milk to a retaliatory tariff list, covering $72 billion in exports. Japan and Australia tightened import standards, starting June 2025. The issue isn't quality, it's labeling transparency. Many countries require clear disclosure of growth hormone, RBST, antibiotic use, or farm source labels not mandatory in the U.S. Trucks of milk and cheese are being returned. Much of this excess supply is sold domestically at deep discounts, 1 gallon for as low as $1.80 instead of $3.50. But the real cost is trust. Americans are asking, if others won't buy this milk, what's in it? Confidence in the U.S. dairy industry is eroding. While the U.S. grapples with oversupply and trade retaliation, Canada quietly expands its global dairy footprint through solid planning, supply control, and farm support. Its supply management system limits oversupply, bans growth hormones and excess antibiotics, and ensures full traceability from farm to table. Exported Canadian dairy clearly states these standards, which many importing countries now expect. As a result, Canada has gained market share in Japan, South Korea, the EU, and even the Middle East. Canadian dairy export revenues surpassed 4.2 billion Canadian dollars in the first half of 2025, up nearly 18% from the same period in 2024. While U.S. families shop for those discounted cheese packs or milk jugs, they may not realize local dairy farmers are shutting operations, halting milking, or selling off farms. If this continues, the U.S. dairy sector faces more than lost markets. It risks losing the next generation of farmers once raised on its own family milk. Canada is making bold economic moves as U.S. trade policies trigger a wave of responses. Could these changes quietly reshape what Americans buy and how much they pay? In 2024, the Trump administration imposed a 50% tariff on imported aluminum to protect U.S. metal industries. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, prices of aluminum products rose 22% within months. This hit American manufacturers and construction firms hard, especially those reliant on imports. Canada, which supplies over 70% of North America's aluminum, responded strongly. Aluminerie Alouette in Quebec announced a $1.1 billion plant modernization, powered by low-cost clean energy from hydro, Quebec. Quebec's economy minister stated, "The U.S. depends on U.S. for aluminum, and we won't stand by." For Americans, the effects are immediate. The price surge affects home renovation, auto repair, and beverage packaging. Costs on products like soda cans and appliances may rise, adding up to $2.5 billion annually for U.S. consumers. Small businesses in construction and manufacturing face tighter margins and difficult decisions. Canada is rapidly diversifying trade. In early 2024, non-U.S. exports rose 18%, while U.S. bound exports fell to their lowest since the pandemic. Gold exports to the U.K. jumped over 30%. Crude oil to Singapore hit records, and Italian imports of Canadian aluminum and pharmaceuticals reached all-time highs. Pork exports to Japan rose 13%, with Canadian food favored for its clean, traceable image. As Canada looks beyond the U.S., American buyers risk losing access to key supplies, from metals to pharma ingredients, weakening supply chains, raising costs, and reducing product availability. U.S. consumers may face higher prices or longer wait times for top, quality goods. Canada's Industry Minister Melanie Joly criticized the Trump administration's trade tactics, saying, "We are in a tariff war, and negotiating with the U.S. is tougher than ever." She announced a 3-point response: stronger anti-dumping rules, better liquidity support for industry, and faster project approvals, cut from 5 years to 2. Joly also introduced incentives to attract top researchers, noting Canada welcomes talent, especially as academic freedom faces challenges in the U.S. Canada's assertive approach may heighten competition for talent and investment. U.S. universities and tech industries risk a brain drain as researchers and students OPT for Canada's more supportive environment. This could affect American innovation and growth in tech, biotech, and energy. Canada is investing heavily in green energy, hydro, hydrogen, and advanced fuels to lead the global energy shift. High-value exports like battery tech, advanced materials, and aerospace are priorities. The goal? Commercial independence and freedom from Washington's changing moods. If Canada becomes a clean tech and export leader, U.S. industries could lose a key supplier and tech partner. That could mean tougher competition, reduced influence in North America, and, for consumers, fewer options, and higher costs for next-gen products like EVs and energy-efficient appliances.